Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. This is John with Murder by the Book, coming to you with another live event. So before I bring Douglas and Lincoln in, I wanted to real quick give everybody a little spiel about everything that's happening at the store. As you guys know, we are open again. We opened up on Halloween, so the store is open for browsing. Of course, we know not everybody is 100% comfortable coming into the store. So if you're interested in doing curbside pickup, we're definitely available for that. Also available through the website murderbooks.com and by phone. Also wanted to mention that we recently just launched a new subscription box series. So if you have not signed up for that, you can go to murderbooks.com and get some more information about that. We just announced the new round of titles in today's newsletter that went out. And one more thing before I bring Douglas and Lincoln in, I just wanted to mention a couple of upcoming events that we've got going on. Next Tuesday, we'll be chatting with Hilary Davidson about the re-release of her novels. Greg Hurwitz is going to join us next Wednesday on the 27th. We're super excited about that. And then we've got a really busy February lined up as well. So if you guys haven't checked out the website, definitely do that. And the last thing I will mention before we bring Douglas and Lincoln out is that we actually do have signed copies of The Scorpion's Tale in stock. So you can order those through murderbooks.com. I've posted a link in the chats. And while I'm chatting with them, if you have any questions for either author, please definitely post those in the comments, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, and we will get to those. So as I mentioned, tonight we're going to be talking about The Scorpion's Tale, which is the new book by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. It is also the newest in their Nora Kelly series. The thrillers of Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child stand head and shoulders above their rivals, says Publishers Weekly. Preston and Child's Relic and the Cabinet of Curiosities were chosen by readers in a National Public Radio poll as being among the 100 greatest thrillers ever written, and Relic was made into a #1 box office hit movie. They are the co-authors of the famed Pendergast series, and their recent novels include Crooked River, Old Bones, Verses for the Dead, and City of Endless Night. In addition to his novels, Douglas Preston writes about archaeology for the New Yorker and National Geographic magazines, and Lincoln Child is a Florida resident and former book editor who has published 7 novels of his own, including bestsellers such as Full Wolf Moon and Deep Storm. So I'm going to bring them out and we're going to start chatting. How are you tonight, Douglas?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining us. And let me add Lincoln to the stream as well. How are you tonight, Lincoln?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for joining us. So funny story. Years ago, we did a Skype event at the store with them. We had Douglas in the store and we Skyped Lincoln in. And it was the first time we had done a kind of in-person and virtual Skype event. You know, now years later, we're much better at being able to do virtual stuff. So we're happy to have both of you together. So I've got some questions for you about the new book, but at any point, if you guys have something specific you wanted to say about it, if you had questions for each other, please feel free to jump in and run with it. But to start, can one of you tell us a little bit about the new book, The Scorpion's Tale?
Over to you, Doug.
Well, thank you, partner. Well, it is a Nora Kelly and Corey Swanson book. It's the second book in a new series featuring Nora Kelly, who is an archaeologist who has appeared in many of the Pendergast novels, as well as Corey Swanson, who is now a rookie FBI agent who also has appeared in a number of Pendergast novels. But the two characters never met each other until this series. And I wish I could say that they get along perfectly well, but not quite. But the book, I'll just talk about the opening of the book a little bit because I don't want to get too deep into it and ruin it for everyone. But the book takes place in New Mexico, and it opens up with a gunfight at a ghost town in New Mexico, where the sheriff, the Socorro County sheriff in southern New Mexico, comes across a looter in this ghost town, and they exchange gunfire. The sheriff gets his ear shot off, and the looter gets a bullet in the knee. And it turns out he's found a strange corpse buried, buried in the basement of this ruined building. And so Corey Swanson, who is a rookie FBI agent, is assigned the case. And it's kind of a throwaway case. her assignment is to figure out whether this was a homicide or an accident, and that's pretty much it. And the body looks to be about 60, 70 years old. It's kind of mummified in the desert air, and so as she starts, working on this body, trying to retrieve it, she realizes that it's going to require an archaeological excavation. You can't just pull this very fragile mummy that's falling apart out of the ground. So she asks Nora Kelly to excavate it, and she does that, and she discovers several very strange things. One is that the body is in a fetal position with a expression of absolute agony on the face, and the second is that the skin is coming off in sheets, and there's some of the clothing looks singed. It's just a very strange challenge for her as an archaeologist to excavate, and a great challenge for Corey Swanson, who is a forensic anthropologist, to analyze what exactly happened to this body and how this person died.
Lincoln, you have anything to add there?
Well, just that the fact that the radioactive body and the skin coming off in sheets, it's like how I feel after a hangover, on a big party the night before. No, that's a joke. Doug did a very good job of going over the background. And one of the nice things for me about this book was it was almost as much a journey of discovery for me as it was, I think, for a lot of the readers, because it really takes place in Doug's backyard. He lives half the year in New Mexico. He traveled over much of New Mexico and Arizona, Utah, the whole area on horseback for an earlier book, almost killed himself doing it. And so he's on the way, picked up all these legends and stories. And some of them turn out not to be legends. They have more than a grain of truth to them. And so for me, I was learning all these things in addition to just adding ideas of my own that were not bound by place or time. Doug had this, huge fund of stories that he was able to suggest to add various subplots or complications. So, it was really a fun experience for me in that way.
So what made you guys, this is the second book with Nora kind of as the main character. What made you decide to give her own series?
The reason is because, she let us, first of all, she let us do a series about her. We kind of let our characters dictate what we can chronicle, what we can't. But Nora was an archaeologist, and she figured in a lot of our most popular early books, Thunderhead, Cabinet of Curiosities, and a few others. She was married to Bill Smithback, the late great journalist, and she was one of our favorite characters and certainly one of our favorite woman characters. And so we thought once Gideon Crew was no longer able to show up, for his screen tests, we would write a series starting with Nora. And immediately we were confronted with the question, well, if we use Nora as a heroine, what's she going to be doing? She can dig up all the bones she wants and find all the really interesting legends imaginable. There's Doug has many of his own, as I told you, and we could research our own, but what's she going to do with them? And so, the moment we asked the question, we had the answer, and that is to have her team up with Corey Swanson, who has her own backstory with Agent Pendergast, starting with Still Life with Crows and going forward, where she started out as a rebel without a cause in a tiny town in Kansas. Under Pendergast's tutelage, she became an FBI novice agent, and she's been assigned to the Albuquerque field office. Very, luckily for us. And so the two of them make a perfect team, because the things that Nora digs up that seem to be suspicious, Corey can investigate. And New Mexico being what it is, most things that or a lot of things that the police get involved with are things that are buried or dug up or ossified. And so you can call in an archaeologist to look at them. So it's a great team. They're both women. They both have their own issues. They both struggle with the same kind of problems that a lot of women today do, trying to make sure they get their voices heard, when they have expertise, as these two so clearly do. And it's working well. We've been getting a lot of emails from people, women, men, everything, saying that they like how we were able to do a pretty decent job, apparently, of making them believable, even though we're, they're only helping us. We're not playing the roles ourselves.
So did you guys do, since you're writing two female characters, did you guys have anybody else kind of read over it? What did you do to make sure that you got the female voice down and accurate in the books?
Well, these are characters that we've actually been developing for about 20 years or more. And we really felt that we had understood who they were and really nailed them. They're as Link pointed out, Corey started off as a high school student in Still Life with Crows, and she was really heading in the wrong direction. Pendergast rescued her in a way. I mean, he mentored her. He sent her off to private school, and then supported her going to the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and finally through the FBI Academy and now to Albuquerque. So I think we really get these characters, and it's up to our readers to decide whether we've succeeded or not. And I guess the emails we're getting, I think they feel we have succeeded. But
so since you have such a nice long series and you have such a vast array of kind of secondary characters that you can pull in from different book to book, how do you keep that straight? Do you have like a timeline or character studies, so like kind of where these secondary characters might be when they're not on screen, to know like when you can pull them in and out?
We do, as a matter of fact. We've been keeping a very careful timeline of our mainstay character, Agent Pendergast. And amusingly enough, as the series goes on, time seems to slow down more and more for him. For example, the last 3 books probably take place over 3 months in his life, but they take place over, so back when we started, he was basically our age, and now we're, superannuated writers, and he's still in the prime of life. But at the same time, we also keep track of, what sub-character is entering college, or what sub-character might be pregnant, or what character might be doing this or that. So yes, we do keep track of that, but it's part of this whole metaverse that we have that we didn't intend to write originally. When we wrote our first book, Relic, it was really a one-off. We were both just having fun, and we wanted to write a thriller. We had no idea that it was going to be become this whole universe of characters. And in particular, we didn't think that those characters would overlap. It wasn't until in our book Thunderhead, where we introduced Nora Kelly, that we decided to bring in Smithback, the reporter from Relic. And that's really what started it all. And so now there's this very, tightly woven skein of characters and lifespans. And we do manage to keep them all separate and keep track of them all. Occasionally one will drift off into the ether, not to be seen again. That doesn't mean they won't come back sometime in the future.
I think it'd be really interesting if somebody did a timeline of kind of series characters and the age that they start as the books start, and then to see kind of how slowly they start to age as the series progresses. Because it's always great to hear authors talk about how they slow that aging process down the further they get into a series.
I wonder if some authors actually just assume their character stays the same age. I mean, for example, did Sherlock Holmes age? I don't even know if he did or not, or if it was ever even came up. Watson got married, and so obviously time is passing for him. But I'm not really sure how many authors have long, look at Dirk Pitt. I mean,
Mhm.
or anybody, for that matter, or Jack Reacher. Do they age? Maybe so.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
the only one.
It is funny. Sherlock Holmes, Watson definitely ages, but Sherlock Holmes does not. I mean, that really, I think, is the case.
Writers have a vested interest in keeping their golden gooses laying eggs, so to speak. That's a horrible metaphor, but you know what I mean. I hope.
Yeah, I think the only one that I can think of that definitely like aged them was Ian Rankin with Rebus, and then he had him retire, and then it was like, crap, he's reached retirement age. What do I do now? So we had one question from the crowd, and I'm sure you guys get this a lot, but I don't think everybody has heard you tell the story. Can you guys talk a little bit briefly about how you met and how you came to write together?
Well, it is kind of a curious story. We were both in our early 20s, and I was working at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, writing a column in the magazine. And I got a call one day from a very distinguished sounding editor who said that he was a senior editor at St. Martin's Press. Would I care to have lunch with him at the Russian Tea Room to discuss a book idea? Well, I was very thrilled with that. So I rushed off to the Salvation Army and bought a jacket so I could get into the Russian Tea Room. But when I arrived, I was looking around for this very distinguished editor who had spoken to me, and there was just this kid, younger than me, at a table, the worst table in the restaurant. They put him way in the back. He's waving at me, and I ignored him for a minute, thinking that can't be the editor, but it was, and it was Lincoln, and he proposed a book, which I wrote, a nonfiction book called Dinosaurs in the Attic, which was a history of the museum. And at the end of that, Lincoln said to me, Doug, this building, this museum is the scariest damn building in the world. We have got to set a thriller in this building. And I said, well, Lincoln, I don't really know how to write a thriller. And he said, well, I do. You know the museum, and I know how to write thrillers. I said, well, how do you know how to write a thriller? He said, I've read so many bad thrillers that I know exactly what not to do. And so I know what not to do. And believe me, it's going to be a good thriller. So that was where Relic came from. It was originally just going to be a one-off, but we had so much fun writing it, and it was so successful. And, I remember my wife reading Relic and saying, Doug, you've finally written a really good book. So anyway, but the thing is, we really, really enjoyed these books, and so we kept writing them together. And we enjoy working together most of the time. Sometimes we argue like a bad married couple, but most of the time we're good.
So how does the process of working together, do you guys just, I know it's easier now with technology, like how has it evolved over the course of starting the books when you did? And then how do you guys do it now, do you just pass chapters back and forth?
No, a lot of people would assume that's the way we work, but it's not. But you're right about how technology has changed. Our writing together has changed in two ways, technologically and also just logistically. In the very early days, we actually sent faxes back and forth. That was horrible. And we were using really decrepit word processors that no longer exist. Our writing style has kept the same in certain ways, and that is that we're careful to make sure that we don't toss chapters back and forth. The way we work now is just really a refinement of that. We discuss the book until we're fairly happy with the idea of the next story, with a very clear idea of how it's going to start out, and then a more generalized, amorphous idea as the book gets farther on, because we want to have time to change our minds or change direction if a better idea occurs to us. And then we argue over a. Everything all right? Is there a beeping noise from somewhere?
I don't hear anything. Do you?
Okay. All right. Sorry. And we argue and discuss about the next set of chapters, 10 chapters, 15 chapters. Then we assign the chapters, and usually it will be Doug will get certain chapters of a certain character, for example. I will get a certain subplot. I tend to write the chapters of the serial killers for some reason. I don't know why. I'm the nicest, kindest guy you can imagine. And Doug tends to write a lot of the action scenes. He's, one of the roles he's really grown into is writing the third act of most of our books. At least the chapters involving the climax of the action. And the reason we don't bounce chapters back and forth is because I think it would be a recipe for disaster. That it wouldn't be as smooth and as hopefully as polished as it is now, because we each take a subplot or a set of chapters involving one theme, and then at the end we read each other's chapters and edit them, and then we sort of polish the whole thing finally, so that ideally readers won't have a sense of a sudden jarring or a loss of suspension of disbelief, so that it seems like a smooth transition from chapter to chapter.
So before you guys started doing these books together, we mentioned when we were doing the intro, Lincoln, that you were a book editor, and Douglas, you do a lot of nonfiction writing. Can you guys talk a little bit about that and how that influences your fiction, or how you're able to use some of that in the fiction that you write?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of the nonfiction material that I've written, articles for The New Yorker and actually Smithsonian and National Geographic, have then developed into nonfiction books. For example, I wrote a piece for Smithsonian about the Oak Island treasure, and that became Riptide. And I wrote a piece for The New Yorker about prehistoric cannibalism in the American Southwest that was real, and that became the fictional story Thunderhead. So that's sort of, from my point of view now, Link also brings into the partnership a background of editing ghost stories, and also he's a tremendous aficionado of horror, and so that stream. So the nonfiction stream a lot of it comes in from my end, and then the horror and the supernatural or the quasi supernatural comes in from Link's side. I mean, Link, maybe you want to add to that.
No, that's pretty good. That's quite true. I think both Doug and I read a lot of Edgar Allan Poe, and similar authors when we were young. But I'm afraid I read them rather too deeply, Lovecraft and things like that at a very young age, and it warped me to this day. And so when we wrote Relic, I insisted on there being a sub-basement because, in Lovecraft stories, all the worst things happen when somebody goes into the basement, and that's not bad enough. They have to discover a sub-basement, and then usually at the bottom of the sub-basement, they find chisel marks, made from underneath going up, and that's about when I lost my mind in ninth grade, I think it was. And so, our books have always had more or less of a supernatural flavor to them. In fact, on our first couple of books, particularly Relic, our publishers didn't know what to call it. I don't think there was except for Andromeda Strain, there were very, very few techno thrillers out then. But that's what they ended up calling it, because we don't write ghost stories, per se. We don't write horror novels or occult novels, although we do bring in elements of such things. There's usually a scientific explanation, not always, but usually. But we just have a lot of fun because that adds a whole second layer to the technology. If you have a book about, like our second book, Bound Dragon, was about this terrible kind of flu where this new vaccine for the flu actually causes a worse flu than was existing before. And if you have this sort of scientific medical as the main plot, if you could find a sort of a supernatural or dark or mysterious underpinning for that, it simply adds a bit more for the reader to chew on, so to speak. So
how do you balance bringing in some of those, kind of vaguely horror, supernatural elements with the techno thriller elements? How do you know how far you can push the supernatural stuff and still have it be plausible and not lose readers?
The way we do it is actually we're still learning. If we were to go down and name each of our books, Crimson Shore, the one that we just finished just basically today, you could say some of these books have a lot of supernatural elements in them, and other ones have very little. The books involving Pendergast's wife, for example, and other ones like the Brimstone series are mostly Grand Guignol. They're more gothic in tone than they are supernatural. So there's no exact. It's not like we turn it up to 11, or whatever. It's whatever the plot really calls for. For example, Cemetery Dance, where there's a zombie, maybe it actually is a zombie, and so there's enough supernatural elements in our past books so readers can't always assume, oh, this is just going to have a medical or a scientific explanation in the final chapter. Just like we've killed off some very important characters, it hurt us. People got very angry at us and stopped reading our books when we got rid of one particular character. But we did it for the greater good, in a sense, so that readers will never be sure who's going to make it. And they hopefully it makes for a more interesting story that way.
Yeah, it's John Connolly does that really well too, where he balances, some of his books are more supernatural, some of them are more straight up detective novels, and it's great to kind of never know as you're going in, kind of where it's going to fall. So since you guys both do your own standalone novels or novels under your own names, and then you do these stuff together, do you approach the things that you're writing solo differently than you do the things that you're writing together?
Yes, very much so. Writing a novel by yourself is a completely different experience than writing it with a partner. It's much more stressful when you're writing a novel by yourself. And the problem is that there's no one there to tell you when you're going awry. I don't have a Lincoln saying to me, hey, Doug, this really sucks. You got to throw this out. Let's go in a different direction. And so when you're writing a novel by yourself, you sometimes can go far, far down the wrong road before you realize you're in trouble. And then you have to throw everything away and start over again. I just think, when I'm working with Lincoln and I'm writing a chapter and I'm like, oh, shit, what am I going to do here? I'm completely stuck. I can call him up on the phone, and in 15 minutes, Lincoln will come up with a brilliant answer, or listening to Lincoln, I'll come up with a brilliant answer or whatever. But anyway, we managed to push through it. Whereas if you're doing it by yourself, you can spend days, banging your head against a wall, trying to figure out what to do.
I just want to add one thing to what Doug said, and that is when he began to answer, he said, it's a lot more stressful writing. And I'll bet a lot of people assumed he was going to say writing with a partner, because then there's look at the Beatles. I mean, as a perfect example, we're not the Beatles, obviously, but there's egos involved and other people, involved, and gauging each other's work. Is he doing enough work? Is he contributing enough ideas? And we may have even thought that ourselves until we got involved in it and found out the hard way, in a sense, by writing our own books too, that at least in our partnership, writing the joint books is a lot more fun. It's it's like rowing a canoe. It's really a pain in the butt if you're the only guy in the back trying to get somewhere.
Yeah, one of the factors that makes this possible, and it's actually probably the number one factor, is that we trust each other's judgment completely. I mean, if you have a writing partnership and you don't believe your partner when he says to you, what you've written here, Doug, isn't that good? Or if I say to Lincoln, Lincoln, this just doesn't work. The natural reaction is to get all bristly and defensive. And that's the end of the partnership. As soon as you start, going down that road. So when Link, says something to me like, this is a pile of steaming crap. I mean, I might get upset for 15 minutes, but then I realize, that's what the partnership's all about. And I got to trust his judgment. And
yeah, especially at this point, because we've been at it so long that if Doug criticizes what I'm doing, it's not to score points or because he's, he thinks that he's annoyed because I wrote a really good scene and it's better than his last scene or anything like that. It's because he knows, it's not up to par, and we're terrified of losing our edge. And if we ever did that, or if it ever became a job as opposed to, a weekend of playing with each other, in the sandbox, we'd stop doing it. We challenge each other rather than make it easier for each other. And so when Doug complains or he points out something, I know that even if I don't agree with him, it's worth considering because he's only doing it because he wants to make the book better and make our readers happier and make the partnership stronger.
So before I get into some of the crowd questions that popped up, I wanted to ask, so when you guys got started, was there any discussion about writing under one pseudonym instead of both of your names?
Well, that's a funny thing because we did go through a lot of discussions about that because we were concerned that maybe people wouldn't buy our books because there were two names attached. And there is kind of an idea that of the auteur, the great, the great author. And if you have two of them, it's like, wait a minute, this must be, kind of garbage. This can't be good. And in fact, it was such a big problem that our first British publisher introduced us to in the UK as Lincoln Preston, because they felt that British readers would absolutely not read a book written by two people. Now, if you look back in history, you will see that there are great creative partnerships. Masaccio and Mazzolino, for example, who launched the Renaissance with the Brancacci Chapel. I mean, you could go on, and many, many great movies have been made with multiple writers. So, I think that that's a false idea that somehow that only one person can create a great work of art. Not that we're saying that our works of art are on the level of Masaccio, but still.
Although we can understand it because the idea of two people writing a novel is very different than two people writing a history of World War II. It's like two people writing a poem together. It doesn't seem like it would work, but in our case at least, it's because of the way our minds work and the respect we have for each other and the way we've managed over the years to learn how to divvy things up. And also I've learned a lot of writing from Doug, and I think he's learned something about editing and pacing from me. And so we know it's always a very organic, creative partnership in that way. It's always growing. But you're right, when we first started out, even our American publisher was kind of worried that is anybody going to buy a novel? And now it's Preston and Child, and that's the brand.
And it's interesting to see just how in the last, 10 or 15 years too, how publishing has really adjusted to that, and now how you see a lot more collaborative efforts come out from everybody. So we've got some really great crowd questions that have popped up. So Cinnamon wants to know, do you guys have any books where Pendergast or Nora Kelly meet Jeremy Logan?
No. Jeremy Logan is the hero of my solo books. Just like Wyman Ford is the hero of Doug's solo novel. And we discussed at one point whether we should have our solo characters wandering in, because clearly Jeremy Logan, who is an enigmologist, he studies mysteries that may or may not be supernatural, would be tailor-made as a character for some of our joint books, just as Wyman Ford, the CIA ex-officer, would be an idea for others. But we made a decision not to cross-pollinate a long time ago because we already have this metaverse with probably hundreds of people wandering around in it. And as fun as it would be, we just made a conscious decision that it probably would just pollute the waters or at least muddy them.
So I've got a couple of audiobook questions. Rosalie wants to know, if there was any way to potentially put together an audio book that would potentially have a full cast. And Heather also mentioned, is there a way to let the woman who's been narrating the series of audiobooks know that Pendergast is not British?
Well, that's interesting. That's a tough question to answer because I don't really listen to our audiobooks very much. Do you, Lincoln?
Not very much, but I think it's quite rare to have ensemble casts, isn't it? I mean, I don't even know how that would have worked. You just simply have like 5 or 6 different voice actors doing the different voices, and then somebody else doing the third-person narration.
Well, I know they do that because they did that with one of my solo novels, Jenny. They had an ensemble cast. I'm not sure how they did it, but I think they just had like 5 or 6 people in a room, and the main characters, and maybe I just don't know how they did it.
We'll have to listen to this British accent though and see how it sounds. Maybe
who has a British accent? I mean, I know this is kind of
Pendergast. A woman narrator gave Pendergast a British accent. Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's what the comment made it sound like.
Okay, it might be a Southern accent. Doug and I have to listen and see.
Has a New Orleans, very particular New Orleans Southern accent, which is not a typical Southern accent. It's very smooth and kind of almost like honey-like. It's not kind of a drawl at all. It has a very upper class sound to it, but it is Southern.
Mellifluous.
Yeah, mellifluous. Thank you. Good word.
So Elizabeth wants to know, do you have ideas for what other Pendergast characters might show up in the Nora Kelly books?
Well, that's another excellent question. Lincoln and I have talked about that. Should we pull in other characters? Obviously, Nora and Corey have characters that they know and are friendly with who are in other Pendergast books. But so far, because the action is taking place out west, the first book, Old Bones, was an excavation of one of the Donner campsites. The Donner Party, of course, was that party of immigrants to California in the 1840s who were caught in a snowstorm in the Sierras and spent the winter there, and many of them starved to death, and the rest resorted to cannibalism. And there were several camps. They weren't all in one place when they were snowed in. And so our novel, Old Bones, involved the excavation of one of these campsites, which, by the way, they have excavated them, and the discovery there of something even worse than cannibalism. That was the first one in the series. So and then this one takes place in New Mexico, and because Corey and Nora are both located in New Mexico, it seems that the Pendergast universe has been left behind in New York.
One question though that does bring to mind is, I don't know if you have any way of asking readers to give us their opinion by messaging you or whatever, but so far we've been writing this series. There are only 2 books in it yet, but we're about to begin to work on the 3rd. We've enjoyed bringing Pendergast in for a cameo appearance at the end of the book, thinking because both Nora and Corey know him so well, and our readers, many of them can't get enough of him. We thought it'd be nice just to sort of bring him in at an unexpected moment. Some people like that. Some people think it's inappropriate, him coming in like Deus Ex Machina and solving some long hidden mystery. And we're just curious, if your listeners and viewers have a strong opinion one way or the other.
So if you guys are watching, you can definitely post that in the comments either way. Yes, have him show up, don't have him show up. And then Doug and Link, if you guys want to go back later, you'll be able to see the responses, and I can kind of keep an eye on some of them that are coming in as well.
One other thing I wanted to add is that even if we don't add a lot more characters into the Nora and Corey novels, just as we did not in the Gideon Crew novels, there's such a rich cast to draw on for the Pendergast novels that we still have many including a certain brother, who are lurking, ready to come out when a reader, and maybe us, least expect it.
Yeah. So Lisa wants to know, did either of you guys have an actor or a public personality in your head when you were creating Pendergast?
We did not have anyone in mind when we created Pendergast. He sort of was a unique creation, and the way he came about was kind of strange. I remember when it happened, I was writing the first few chapters of Relic, and I had created these two cops. One was Irish and one was Italian, and they were both very similar, working class guys, rough on the outside with a heart of gold, that sort of thing. And I sent those chapters to Lincoln, and he said, "Boy, these are great chapters, but these two cops are really the same character, and I think we ought to put them together into one character, and then I think we ought to come up with a detective that's totally different from anything that anyone has done before." And of course, by this time, I was really pissed off at him criticizing my two characters, and so I very sarcastically said, "Oh yeah, what we need is an albino FBI agent from New Orleans." And Lincoln said, "No, wait a minute. Maybe we can work with that." And right there, I would think in the next 15 to 20 minutes, we started talking about this person. Now, he's not albino, but he's just very pale, and he wears a black suit, and he has kind of an extremely chiseled, ascetic look to him. And so often at the murder scene, he's mistaken for the Undertaker. And anyway, and then we just started throwing out these ideas, and in 20 minutes, this man, Pendergast, was standing in front of us, fully formed and ready to go.
But it's funny because that question really interests a lot of our readers. And of course, over the years, we've suggested, or they have suggested to us, who should play Pendergast. And over the years, these actors have aged out of the role. Early on, it was Chris Walken and Willem Dafoe. More recently, it's people like the character who played Commissioner Gordon in the Batman movies.
You got me.
Sorry?
I don't know. Who's that?
He was in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Oh my God, he's a great actor. Or the man who played in the Sherlock Holmes.
Gary Oldman.
Gary Oldman, yes.
Right.
And Benedict Cumberbatch too. Suggested.
And so it looks like, based on the comments that I'm seeing pop up, people are overwhelmingly fans of Pendergast popping up as a cameo. So it seems very, very heavy on the yes side of that.
Good. Well, that's
in favor of him showing up.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the voice of America has spoken.
I was going to say, one of the things that we really miss because of COVID is meeting our readers and these book signings and being able to ask them questions like this in person. So we really appreciate getting that feedback.
A couple people have asked if you guys foresee Corey running into Agent Coffee at any point.
Agent Coffee. Oh yeah.
Those readers are. We have to congratulate them for their longevity in terms of being real fans of ours, because he goes back a ways. I mean, and he didn't leave the series on a good note, so he may well appear again. I don't think that, Doug, did that ever occur to you?
Well, I remember Agent Coffee as being one of my favorite characters to hate.
Yes.
I just couldn't stand him. I mean, he was, you create a character like that, and then you look at him and you say, God, I hate this person. And then you ask yourself, why did I create this jerk? Anyway, I mean, we got like God, but I mean, there has to be good and bad people in a thriller, and people have to die, even dogs.
Let's not get into that. But I think Coffee was sent off to Waco, Texas, or someplace like that, and so he may well appear, because that's not that far from Albuquerque.
Yeah, where he served a heroic role the David Koresh compound incident.
No comment.
Kayla wants to know, do either of you have a favorite book of your own that you've written?
Jointly or singly?
Either.
Well, all right. Let's see. You know, I think I have a few favorites that we've written together. I think Cabinet of Curiosities and Still Life with Crows are really a high watermark there. And I think that I'm going to say this. I think that the Scorpion's Tail is really a good book. I think it's one of the best books we've written. And we're getting, wonderful reviews on Amazon. People just love this book. So a lot of times you find that the opinion that readers have is different from your own opinion. But I don't know. I think it's a really good book. It has some crazy twists in it that I think are some of the best ones we've ever come up with. I mean, what do you think, Link?
I agree. What do you think about your solo books? Most of those are nonfiction, but
I think my favorite solo book is The Lost City of the Monkey God. That's still selling really well, actually. And then I would say Cities of Gold, where I rode 1,000 miles with my pal Walter Nelson, who I think is probably listening. He's my old riding pal. In fact, for the Scorpion's Tail, many years ago in the mid-'90s, Walter and I got on horseback and we rode across the Mojada del Muerto Desert, which is the major setting in the Scorpion's Tail. 120 miles. It's one of the harshest deserts in the entire country, and there's water in only one place. And it's actually it's so remote. It's the place they chose to detonate the first atomic bomb in the Trinity test. And half of that desert is taken up by the White Sands Missile Range today. But anyway, so
they didn't know there was only one place to water when they started out on horseback. They found that out the hard way.
Actually, my wife drove the horse trailer with water in it, so we weren't in the kind of danger that you might expect. I did some other horseback rides with my pal Walter where we ran out of water and it was really hairy, but I didn't want to repeat that. That's pretty scary. I mean, when you have horses, the horses have to drink 5 to 10 gallons of water a day in the desert. I mean, you just can't find a puddle. You've got to find serious water. And if you have 4 horses, like Walter and I did, that's 40 gallons of water a day. That's a lot of that's a real burden to find that kind of water in the desert.
Let me answer the question. I would say that I always have a special place in my heart for Relic because that was like our firstborn. I also like Cabinet a lot because that was really where Pendergast came into his own, and a lot of our more outre but persistent ideas like memory crossings and Constance Green and Dr. Lang came from. And then I also like Blue Labyrinth. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with that book because Pendergast spends a lot of that book sort of sick and enfeebled, and other people have to step in and help him out. But I also like that in a way because it seems like our readers veer between telling us that he's too much of a Superman to saying, oh, why is he getting beat up all the time and within an inch of his life. But I just like the closing scenes in that book set in the botanical gardens where Constance comes in with that.
You better not say a spoiler, but anyway, she is really one crazy woman.
Yes. As for my solo books, I like Utopia, my first, also known as Terminal Velocity, just because of the amount of brain work that went into thinking up the amusement park and every little piece of it, like a fine watch. And then Deep Storm, the first book to mention Jeremy Logan, because I just like the setting underneath the seabed, exploring an alien artifact. I just thought it was, pretty good.
Yeah, that book, Deep Storm, was definitely my favorite of your solo novels. That was an outstanding book.
Thank you, Doug.
You're welcome.
There are lots of people in the comments agreeing that Cabinet was one of their favorites as well. So somebody else asked, do either of you see yourselves in any of the characters that you write?
Well, I would say as far as Pendergast goes, I don't see myself in him. I wish I had the qualities that he has, but I don't. So in a way, I'm a little bit envious of him. He has qualities that I will never achieve. As far as the characters go, I guess Smithback is probably the one that I think is probably closest to me in a way. Poor Smithback.
Yeah, Doug and I have often thought that Smithback is the sort of wise ass character we give our own lines to, things that we would say, and so it sort of mortified us when at certain books signings, people would say, "Why does Smithback get so much time in these books?" He's such a boring, self-absorbed guy. He's kind of I don't like him. You should kill him off. That offended us, so we took care of it.
Somebody else in the comments mentioned, would you guys be tempted at any point to write kind of a fake Smithback book? Since there are books, since they exist in the world, would you write one in our world that was by him?
We are writing one. We're doing it right now. But that's a really interesting comment. We are doing it not to sell, but to give away to our readers. We're giving it away to them in parts through our newsletter. So the first, I think, 3 parts have been written. Isn't that right, Lincoln?
Yes, 3 parts.
And so if you want to read it, you have to subscribe to our newsletter. You just go to our Facebook page and click on the button, or you go to our website and poke around and figure out where the newsletter page is, and then you just put in your email address, and we're going to send your email address to every telemarketing firm in the country. We promise you. I'm kidding. No one ever will see your email address. And we only send out 1 newsletter a month. So you're not going to give us your email address and then, some of these companies, then you get 3 emails a day. It's like, oh my God, forget it. No, just 1 a month, if that.
The email is a real job too, because when we started out doing a newsletter, we decided we're not going to do the typical, well, maybe it's not typical, but the usual author newsletter saying, I'm appearing at X, Y, and Z bookstore, and I just got this review, and aren't I great? We try to keep ourselves in the background and give, contests, new original content, interviews with Pendergast, things like that, and it's difficult to come up with ideas to entertain our readers. And that's why we hit on this Smithback story, which, as Doug says, we're giving away free with each episode of the current newsletter, and is also, I believe, available on our website also, so be able to catch up.
It's very cool because it's a story within a story. The way it starts is that Roger Smithback, who's Bill Smithback's brother, finds this trunk of his brother's papers, deceased brother's papers, and realizes that his brother was writing this book about Pendergast, and so he decides to finish the book for him. So the story that we're telling is the story of Smithback's research and efforts in interviewing people and gathering material for this book he's going to write, with excerpts from the book. So, for example, right now he's in New Orleans, and he's speaking to a number of old friends, old and strange friends, the Pendergast family.
I'm sorry. I thought that Roger Smithback is the brother of Bill, and we decided to bring him in as a journalist because we felt so bad about what we did to his brother. And so there is still a Smithback in our books.
Yeah. Brian wants to know, have you had any thoughts about telling a story about Pendergast's early years in the FBI?
Well, Lincoln and I have discussed that, and we may very well do that someday. We don't have any specific ideas related to that. But to go back in time and record one of his earliest cases before Relic, I think would be really interesting. What do you think, Link?
We've alluded to those days in some of our books. We've teased about it, in the opening of one book, we actually showed him and his wife when he was trying to decide whether or not to join the FBI. So we've had little bits and pieces of it, but as Doug pointed out, we've never actually written a book, and that's a very interesting question. And if we have enough years in us, I think we'd love to do that, because it will certainly tie together a lot of things that we try and tie as many strings together and threads together as possible, but there's still many that remain, and a lot of those I think would be solved if we could write an early book showing how he became the kind of agent, the lone wolf that he is.
So you mentioned early in the chat that you guys were doing kind of techno thrillers before there was kind of really a word or a description for them. So since you've been doing them for so long and dealing with those aspects of technology, how do you balance including technology in the books, but with technology changing so fast so that way it doesn't seem outdated by the time the books are released or within a couple of years?
Well, it's funny. We've gotten emails recently from people who've read Relic, and they say, "You guys don't know anything about computers. What is all this crap about the A, B, C, and D or whatever?" Well, the fact is, when Relic was written in the early '90s, computers were completely different, and so a reader today has no idea about the DOS, the old DOS system or whatever, and computer code, languages and that sort of thing. So it's funny, what they think is ignorance is actually ancient history in computers.
We haven't had a lot of problem in keeping up with the technology because we use it ourselves every day. A bigger problem we have is technology that is at the core of the story idea. For example, we were going to write a story 20 years ago, maybe, in which this murderous hacker was killing people by messing with medical devices or turning stoplights green both directions. And then that movie called The Net, I think, with Sandra Bullock came out, and we were like 10 chapters into it. We had to stop, and that's why some of our books we don't want to talk about, including our solo books, because they have ideas. My book Deathmatch about computer dating. When I wrote that, it was just an infant, an industry in its infancy, and now it's of course everywhere. But if somebody had written about that, I would have gotten blown out of the water. So we're not so concerned about technology per se as we are as it leverages the main plot of our stories.
Yeah, I just last year was binge reading this cozy series that started. I think the first one came out in like 1991, and by like the second or third book, it was really fun to see the main character, who's a newspaper reporter trying to do research, and her kids are like, "Mom, have you heard about this new thing called the internet? You can just go to a computer and look stuff up." It's always fun to see that.
I have to point out something that writers all deal with, especially thriller writers, but readers may not be aware of. And that is the problems now caused by the cell phone. Everyone has a cell phone with a camera, a video, and they can pick up the cell phone and call anywhere at any time. So all of a sudden, characters can't get lost. They can't be cut off from the outside world without elaborate storms and cell towers going down or going way out into the middle of nowhere. It really complicates plots trying to get someone isolated and terrified.
Yeah, Thomas Perry has said one of the reasons why he hasn't written a Jane Whitefield book in so long is because of technology and cell phones and stuff like that. It's impossible for somebody to just kind of disappear without all of these devices. So he just hasn't been able to do that. So somebody's One Good Bird on YouTube just asked, what early word processors did you guys use as you were starting to write the books?
We use Xywrite, Nota Bene, and a very early version of FrameMaker.
And we also then we both transferred to WordPerfect.
Yeah.
We use that for a long time.
We stuck with that for the longest. We stuck with that forever, until our publisher insisted that we change to Word.
Xywrite, that was the first. That was the one that we used a great deal before we went to Word Perfect.
Yeah, that was one of them. The New York Times used that too, and that was and Nota Bene was Right for Scholars. It had add-ons for bibliographies and things like that. So
I wrote Dinosaurs in the Attic on a Wang mini computer in the Museum of Natural History. That was one of the very earliest word processors that you could use on a larger frame computer.
I tried writing a short story on a Commodore 64, but I gave up because the screen only held 40 characters. It didn't hold 80 characters, so it was just awful. I couldn't deal with it.
So before we head out this evening, can you guys give readers a clue about what you have coming up next?
Well, yes. We have just today we submitted our new Pendergast novel, and it is called Bloodless, and it takes place in Savannah, Georgia. And Link, do you want to?
Yeah. Okay. It's Pendergast and Constance's ward, and also his unwilling partner at the FBI, Agent Coldmoon, have been in Florida for the last two cases, and they're trying to go their separate ways, and they're basically hijacked by their boss to a new case in Savannah where bodies are showing up with their blood completely drained, and I don't mean drained in any normal way, but totally exsanguinated in the way a mortician might do it. We really wanted to place this book in Savannah because not only is it Southern and it's appropriate for Pendergast, but the city is so beautiful and so full of legend itself, and it drips Gothic with every, hanging piece of Spanish moss. So we couldn't let Pendergast get back to New York. We had to stop and write something in Savannah, and I think this book is outre and Gothic enough to suit that city.
Although after it's published, we may not be allowed in the city.
They still, yeah. Well, they have fond memories of me, I hope, from the writing festival. Maybe we'll still get our invitation to the next one.
Oh, and I think that they have a good tolerance for people that put their books kind of on the map. In the Midnight of Garden Good Evil, Mary Kay Andrews, who lives there, has a really funny Southern series in it. She kind of says in Savannah they refer to that one as that book. So I'm sure they've got a good tolerance for it. I'm sure it'll be fine.
One thing is that in our book, Savannah isn't at fault in any way. They just are. They're just the victim, in a sense.
So thank you both for joining us this evening. If anybody tuned into the chat late, once we stop the live stream tonight, Facebook and YouTube will both archive the video, so you'll be able to watch it from the beginning or watch it again if you missed any parts of it. If you did come in late, we've been chatting with Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child about their new book, The Scorpion's Tale. We do have signed copies available at the store. As I mentioned when we got started, you can order those online. We ship everywhere. We're open for the public to come in, or if you want to do curbside pickup, we're available for that. We've got a lot of great stuff coming up. You can visit murderbooks.com to check that out. Gentlemen, thank you again so much for joining us this evening. It was really nice to chat with you. And take care, and hopefully at some point we will get it back in the store and do this again.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for listening.
Yeah.